Hi, my name is Deborah, and I am a very grateful member of this worldwide fellowship of Al-Anon and Alateen. And I thank you, Janet and Lori, for having me here today. I'm honored. And I want to begin by saying namaste to all of you. And I say this because for me it means that I honor the place in you where spirit lives. I honor the place in you which is of truth, of light, of peace, and of love. When you are in that place, and I am in that place in me, then we are one. And I feel that today, and I have always felt that when I've walked into any room of recovery, and I thank you. I was born into this disease of alcoholism to two parents who were both active, and it was a violent, loveless place to live. And I say that because today I'm going to tell you bits of my story, but more importantly, I really want to share with you the strength and the hope that I have received from all of you with the gifts of these rooms, because recovery really does rock. It really does. My journey in recovery has been to relearn everything that I learned from when I came out of the womb. My earliest memory of how this disease has affected me was when I was 4 years old. I remember I was out playing in the back of my grandfather's house. We lived on the first floor. My grandparents lived on the second floor. And I was playing in the back, and I was dressed up. We must have been going somewhere. And I was, of course, digging to China, like every child does. And I got all muddy and dirty. And my father came out and called me and asked me what I was doing. So, of course, I told him I'm digging to China. Like, he would be excited about that. But because we were getting ready to go out, he became very rageful. And all I remember is that I was picked up by one arm, and as he was beating me, I left my body. He beat me to unconsciousness, and I left my body. And what I learned out of that was, when pain comes into the picture, leave the body. I learned never to tell the truth. And I learned that adults can't be trusted. And I learned that I'm not loved. So we left that house I had lived in for the first 4.5 years of my life, and my beloved grandmother, who I, to this day, even though she's been on the other side for many years, we're still connected. And for many years, my life took on a path of complete insanity with this disease. My mother worked a couple of jobs. She was a single mom with 4 kids, and she worked a few jobs, except on Sundays. That was her day off. And so on Sundays, she could drink all day. And so usually about 12, 1 o'clock, she would have passed out. She would have started this elaborate meal and then passed out. And then around 2 or 3 in the morning, she would wake up and decide the house needed to get cleaned before she went to work on Monday. And so she would come in and start beating us to come and clean the house. Well, during these cleaning sessions, you have to look at the humor in some of this stuff. My mother would pull out the vacuum cleaner. Now, she would be drunk and full of rage vacuuming the house. So what do you think I learned? I learned that when you go to clean the house, as soon as you pull out the vacuum cleaner, you need to really get mad. You need to get really angry. And I can't tell you how many years that when I started to clean my house, I would get so angry. And I remember one day I had just a glimpse of consciousness of my own behavior, and I started laughing. And I realized today that you can clean the house without getting really angry. And what a gift! What a gift! By the time I was 15, there was so much trauma and insanity in the house that I didn't know how I could be in that house anymore. And actually, it sounds crazy, but it was something I did. I used to lay in bed, and I would practice how they would find me, because they'd be so remorseful for what they put me through. And my hands would be folded, and I'd have the rosary beads in my hands, and I'd have a peaceful expression on my face. I didn't know that all kids didn't practice dying in their childhood, but I was one of the ones that did. And it wasn't that I really wanted to die, I just wanted something to change. Anything. I mean, I'd thrown out all the liquor, that didn't work. I kept the house clean for my mother, that didn't change anything. I'd pick up my mother and put her to bed in every single night, kiss her and tell her I love her, but that didn't change anything. Things just continually progress, because that's this disease of alcoholism. And so when I was 15 years old, I went to live with my godmother, my uncle, my 3 boy cousins, and I was reunited with my beloved grandmother, so that's all I cared about. And now there's a whole bunch of story that goes on here, but I don't want to hear it, and I know you probably don't either. But the important thing is what I learned. I learned while I was living with my aunt and uncle to work harder than I ever worked before. I learned not to ever tell anyone what was going on in the house because I was being physically and sexually abused by my uncle. I learned that I was a burden and was told this every single day. I learned that no one wants to hear what I have to say, so I learned to keep my mouth shut and don't talk no matter what. This disease took my mother's life when she was 43 years old. And a few years later, a combination of alcoholism and lung cancer took my father's life. And by then I had started to become very hardened to life. And though I went to my mother's wake and funeral, I went to work the next day. I took no time to grieve. I didn't know what grieving was. And I noticed that little by little, my life force energy was leaving my body. So what do you do when life's going down the tubes? You get married. What else would you do? I got married for the first time at age 20 to my high school sweetheart. This man told me he loved me, and quite honestly, I had never heard those words before. What I didn't know, though, and it may sound strange, because sometimes I think I make this stuff up, but it's my memories, and my recollection was that I was never told I was loved or wanted. And my husband's words of love, though, were followed up with both a physical and emotional abuse. He controlled my every word and every move. My life was threatened every day, to the point that, and to prove his point, he would take his gun and he would load it and he would click it and he would put it to my head before bed and say sweet dreams, so that I would know who was really in charge of the situation. And during this time, I learned that there was no one to help me, and that if I was going to live, I needed to take responsibility for my life. I needed to escape. And though I had tried to escape a few times unsuccessfully, one day I made it. And I didn't know it while I was married to this man, but he was a drug addict. See, I only knew alcoholics. I didn't know anything about the drug side of the world. I didn't know anything like what was cocaine or I didn't have any clue what any of this was. I was brought up with a very strict religion. So looking back at it, I'm thinking, isn't it wonderful how worldly this disease can make you? You learn all kinds of things, like, this was one instance, how to get stopped by the police for going down a one-way street the wrong way, trying to pick up your brother from jail in the middle of the night. Where else would you learn that but in this disease of alcoholism? While in California, because I escaped to California, I took the plunge again and got married a second time to a really loving, gentle man who drank a little too much. And so he was never physically or emotionally available. But he didn't hit me. So that meant he loved me. And that was how I learned. That was what I was learning about love. He did have a disease called jealousy, and after leaving me someplace for the third time where I didn't know how to get home or where I was, I left. And this is news for celebration, because I started to have a little consciousness about how the effects of my childhood had affected me, and I didn't stay in this marriage for 8-10 years. I left within a year. During this time I was out there, I had started my own business, and though I wasn't really making enough money to live on, I really liked what I was doing. I had supplemented my income by waitressing at night and doing bookkeeping for a few local restaurants, and then I would put 10 to 12 hours a day in the restaurant at my business, because remember, I had learned how to be a really good worker as a child. I'm a really good worker bee, and in fact, the name Deborah means busy as a bee. I always laugh when I'm talking to my parents, and I'm like, you couldn't name me Sluggo? I mean, you had to name me something where I'm going to be a... Anyway, after almost 5 years of doing this work 7 days a week, I was truly physically and mentally exhausted, because while I was trying to support myself, I was also trying to support my brother, who is in the middle of his disease, and my younger sister, who had had a full nervous breakdown and had gone back to childhood and couldn't even eat by herself. And so it was quite a roller coaster ride during that time, and all I can say today is thank you, God, for doing for me what I could not do for myself. In 1984, what I learned during that time was that I can control the world if everyone just obeys. I learned that I have to do it all or it doesn't get done. I learned that my own needs aren't important, just make sure everyone is happy so I'll feel safe. And in 1984, I lost my business, my 12-year-old dog, and my 64.5 Mustang. That one really hurt. All within 2 months of one another. I had hit my bottom. I was given, thank you God, the gift of desperation. And I remember the day very clearly. I was sitting in a rocking chair with a razor blade in one hand and the phone in the other, because at age 32, I really didn't care if I stayed or went. And I reached out and called my older sister, who had gotten into this cult called Al-Anon 5 years earlier. And I called her because when she had gotten into this cult, she called me every week to tell me all the wonderful things she was learning, and I would hang up the phone, and I'd start laughing, and I'd say to my brother and sister, oh, Sharon found Jesus, and we'd laugh, and she's gone insane, she's off on another tangent. But you know, when it came down to it, that seed had been planted. Something stuck. And so I reached out to her. She gave me an 800 number to call. She must have slept with it because she had it really right handy in case any of my siblings call. And I called that number, and within an hour, someone was at my house. This wonderful angel, and to this day, I don't know her name. I don't know anything about her. I don't remember anything she looked like. But she took me to her house, and she fed me, and she talked to me. And later that evening, she took me to a meeting. Of course, that didn't mean that my life was any different, but I definitely had hope. Hope, and from that point meant, hang on, peace exists. I was still very outward focused because I still didn't even know that I existed. I had, only existed for others. And I say that even though I wasn't dead, there was no life left in me. I really was a shell of a human being. And so I went to meetings, but they were bringing up so much pain, and I didn't know what to do with it. I just couldn't handle all this pain that was coming in. Plus, I was in shock from all of the changes I had just gone through. And so I don't really know how I even came across to people. People might have been afraid to come near me because I know I walked around with my arms crossed in front of me, looking down at the ground. I was not very approachable. In fact, I didn't want you to touch me because I couldn't trust that I wouldn't be hurt. So I isolated for my first year in Al-Anon. In 1985, I drove across the country back to the East Coast with my boyfriend at the time. We got married later that year. Yes, hope springs eternal. He's also a very gentle, quiet soul who, from what I've observed, has difficulty being in the world, and so he self-medicates with alcohol. 6 years ago, after a lot of prayer, meditation, and searing, gut-wrenching, pull the skin off of your body pain, I finally surrendered to God's will for me, and that was for me to leave my marriage. At the time, I was like, I couldn't leave. I just couldn't leave. But I was tired of beating myself up because in Al-Anon it says you can be happy whether the alcoholic is still drinking or not. But I couldn't be happy. I was getting triggered nonstop. So one night after a meeting, I was sharing with this beautiful angel in the rooms, and I said, how come I can't get this part of the program? What am I doing wrong? It's got to be me. And she smiled and she said to me, maybe you're just tired of living with active alcoholism. And I looked at her, I was like, that felt right. She gave me permission to be happy, permission that I couldn't give myself. I couldn't give myself permission to be happy. So again, thank you, God, for doing for me what I could not do for myself. Surrender. Great word. Following the invisible into the unknown. Thank God I had taken my first 3 steps and had a God of understanding that I knew loved and cared for me. Because little did I know that my job of 24 years would end 2 weeks after I left my husband. So I buckled my seatbelt and got ready for the ride of my life, and it has been a ride these last 6 years. While doing a 4th step meeting on my marriage, I was doing it with a group of people, and I wrote up all my fears and resentments. And in the beginning, it was kind of fun, actually, writing up all those fears and resentments, especially the resentments. I think I had probably 25 pages of resentments. It was very cathartic, and it brought into the open what I had been hiding for so many years. And I was working with this group of folks, and I started to share my 5th step. And I started out by saying, for 24 years, all I did was try to make that man happy. And a very dear friend of mine, I love that righteous indignation, don't you? I mean, I've had it for years. That I'm just, And so it was actually one of my best fear-based acts, righteous indignation. A very good friend of mine smiled and said, "Don't kid yourself. For 24 years, all you did was try to make yourself feel safe." And I realized that I had spent 57 years living in fear, false evidence appearing real. After I finished the rest of the steps on the marriage, I learned the reason I left wasn't because he's an alcoholic. That was looking at it from the blame, shame, victim game, outward focused. But because I didn't like who I was when I was with him. I had to take it in. I had to take responsibility for my part in it. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and most importantly, wisdom to know the difference was my mantra through the entire time I spent going through the surrender process. I realize now that back in 1985, when I started working my steps in Al-Anon, it started to halt the spread of the disease. Some days it felt like I was taking one step forward, 3 steps back, and that's because I was. And it's okay. Today I know it's all in divine order. When I bring my fear-based beliefs to the surface so I can take them through the steps, accept the things I cannot change, and make the changes I could, I'm practicing one of our greatest tools, awareness, acceptance, and action. I had a really hard time with that one, the acceptance part. I mean, my sponsor used to say, "Deborah, you get an awareness and you jump right into action." But I'm a worker bee. You need to spend some time with God until you've accepted what is as is. And I hated it when she said that to me, primarily because I really didn't know what she was talking about. It was such a foreign concept to me. It took me many, many years to really understand the power and gift of divine acceptance. Today I know that my higher power gave me this body for a reason. It is the temple of my soul. This body is how I function, and instead of playing God on the earth plane, I'm learning to be the God-like being that I am. It's my communication system with the God of my understanding, and that communication from the divine comes in the form of feelings, which are body sensations. I put cognitive words to them like anger, fear, shame. I always thought I only had 2 feelings anyway, anger and fear. But it's actually the body sensations now that I tune into. I've learned that when my throat feels constricted, that I am either a belief is coming back up that nobody wants to hear what I have to say, I've told a mistruth, or I'm acting in a way counter to who I am, spirit. When I'm experiencing life on life's terms, hope means heart open, peace exists. I've learned how to feel my feelings and validate them. And validate means to give value to my feelings as to why they're not right, wrong, good, or bad. They're mine. No one else can feel them for me. I learned many years ago to suppress, repress, minimize, and deny those feelings. Stop crying. You have nothing to cry about. No, you want me to give you... And it was constantly suppression, repression, minimizing, and denying them. But today I validate my feelings, and I use real-world historical experiences as evidence to show me that, yes, it's true. Of course, when someone comes up, Deborah, and yelling in your face, your back is going to hurt. It's normal that that happens. Because when I was married and my husband would beat me, I'd put my arms up to protect my face, but I'd get hit in the back. When I give the evidence to my mind, there's no more arguing about it. It releases that electrical trigger on the button that was having my body react and go into overdrive protection mode. I've spoken my truth. Once I validate, I end by saying it's no longer highly functional for me to do this, meaning, what is it keeping me from? What is having all of this keeping me from? Well, let's just guess. Peace, serenity, joy, happiness. And then and only then I can move that energy. I chant, sing, jump around, laugh. And in Al-Anon we say, move a muscle, change a thought. And that's exactly what it means. I moved a lot of muscle and changed a lot of thoughts over the years. When my job ended, I took a little time, but then I went back to school and got a certification. And because I have this neurotic overachiever identity to be the best I can be, I graduated top of my class and the school hired me. So now I teach a few nights a week and I have my own clients. I took all of my life savings, all of it, and purchased this house that when I first looked at it, I didn't realize the whole back of the house wasn't attached to the house. It was completely run down and I ended up rebuilding it. But you know what? Today, I finally live in a home where I feel completely and totally safe. And I realized that I was feeling safe because one day I got up and jumped out of bed and I looked down and I was barefoot walking on the floor. I always wore shoes in case I had to run, but I was barefoot and I knew then I was safe. The next big thing that happened after I moved into this house was that I was able to sleep with my back to the door. I'm no longer afraid of being killed. What a relief. It was one of the biggest gifts I've learned in Al-Anon was I live in a friendly universe and that everything that happens for me and not to me. I love the steps and traditions of recovery. I live these steps. I, for years, have enjoyed taking each step and trying different ways to apply it to my life. I could not have done any of this without sponsors. They helped coach me and guide me. And as I was taking a left, they went, oh, you might want to just take a right here and bring me back to center. For instance, in steps 1 through 3, I learned that rain falls on both the just and the unjust. I'm not being singled out and punished. Everything is for me and not to me. In steps 4 and 5, I learned to surface, accept, and release the experience so I can remember the lesson. In steps 6 and 7, I learned not to waste my pain. Focus on the birth instead of the death. There's always a blessing, a divine shift that is getting ready to take place. Using steps 8 and 9, I have now adopted forgiveness as a self-protection mechanism. I no longer allow my fear-based beliefs that were learned through the eyes of this disease to try to tell me who I am. I've learned to love the sinner and hate the sin. In step 10, I've learned to not put a question mark where God puts a period, because it really does deplete my life force energy trying to control the uncontrollable. I've learned that it's not the body sensations that I'm so afraid of. After all, I was able to suppress, repress, minimize, and deny them for all my life. It was the thoughts that would bring me down. I used step 11 to quiet those mind thoughts. In step 12, I learned that I didn't just go through it. I grew through it. And one of the biggest things I've learned by walking these steps and traditions for many, many years is that God takes my mess and turns it into my message. And I thank you for being so generous with your time and listening. God bless you.
Wow. Powerful, powerful. I'm just blown away. Deb, we thank you for doing your service today and for being our keynote, and I do have a little present to give you.